Hello, and welcome to another episode of Mindset Over Matter. I'm your host, Gabby Gooding, and on this episode, I'd like to explore the concept of attachment and how it relates to our daily lived experiences. This is a complex topic that I won't pretend to be an expert in, but I would like to share some thoughts just to get us thinking more in depth about how attachment impacts us all. As you may or may not know, many religious philosophies have roots in non-attachment or detachment as a pillar of their beliefs. They believe that attachment leads to pain, suffering, disappointment, and from a religious lens, sin or unholiness. So why do we do it at all then? The most obvious answer is that, we have to attach ourselves to a caregiver as infants in order to survive. Right? That's understandable. For the first few years of our lives, it's the only way that we can survive. But as we move through life, I don't think that we do a great job of learning how to detach from things, from people, from expectations. Especially, I can only speak from my experience, I guess, in a Western society and education system. Has done nothing, in my opinion, to ever address this. And if I think about why, I would assume it's because they profit on our attachment. We are taught to root our identities in our attachment to material things, brands, people, job titles, as well as a very short list of socially venerated accomplishments and lifestyles. People's identities are rooted in their attachment to these things. And if they were to have all of that taken away, it would cause a decent amount of stress, I would think. And so it kind of solidified my belief that all of this, conveniently for our capitalist economy, it costs an arm and a leg to attain these things, attain this lifestyle, and then maintain this lifestyle as well. And it all stems from our attachment to these expectations or these material things and all the things that I mentioned. So here's another quick test to show you what I mean. If somebody were to ask you to tell them about yourself, what would you say? I would bet that, at least in part, you would describe yourself in terms of your attachments. And it's not a negative thing necessarily, but I do think that that's part of probably how you would describe yourself. So you may say, I'm a teacher. I have a degree in economics. I am a dog owner. I work for the bank. I own a house. And to be clear, again, these are not bad things to accomplish, as long as if these are truly things that you decided for yourself that you want, I applaud you for attaining your goals. I do have another podcast episode on why we want the things we want. And sometimes we chase things that we didn't actually decide for ourselves that we want. But if everybody looks a certain way on the street, I'm going to pay big money to look like that too. Right. And so kind of a separate issue. So what I'm getting at though, is that the potential problem here lies not just in the reason why you attached yourself to these things, because it's a separate issue, but also in what role these attachments play in your sense of self and the risk that puts you at if you were to ever lose any of these things, right? Because there's an anxiety that goes along with that. The more you have to lose, and then the more stressed out you are about doing everything that you possibly can to keep the things that you have, to keep the status that you have, the job that you have, the house that you have, which probably comes with a mortgage you can't afford. Losing your job now becomes a high risk thing. Losing your circle of friends, right? If you did lose your job, or you did lose your big house, your status, your car, your whatever, right? You lose your lifestyle. It can really take a big hit to your identity. So I'd like to share a question with you that I've been pondering for several years, like as long as I can remember. Maybe, not as long as I can remember. I didn't come up with this when I was 3, but something that has been in the back of my mind for at least a decade. And the question is this: who would you be if you lost everything that you have? Kind of deep, kind of dark. Sorry, not sorry. Because that's what we're here to talk about. But I would encourage you to think about this, just that. Just take the question as it is. Think about it on a walk, on a drive. Use it as a journal prompt if that's, your preferred way to kind of think through questions. Who would you be if you lost everything you have? Now, the reason I think this is a valuable thing to think about is the fact is that we are always at risk of losing the things that we have. As sad as it is, we could lose the people in our lives. We could lose our job. We could lose our house, our car, our health, our lifestyle, like I mentioned, right? All of our attachments. We could lose any of these things at any moment. And the people who are unfortunate enough to experience a loss that big often have some sort of an identity crisis when it happens because they were attached so strongly to the thing or the person or the lifestyle that they lost. Now, I also don't believe it's healthy or possible to be so completely detached from everything that it just wouldn't bother you at all to lose someone close to you or lose your job or anything else. I actually think it would take some degree of psychopathy to be that indifferent. But I do think it's worth thinking about rooting our sense of self in something beyond the material and aiming toward living a life of connection instead of attachment. It's another thing I was thinking about more recently. And let me explain what I mean. So hopefully this will make sense. The way I see it, the concept of attachment inherently requires an external host of some kind for us to attach ourselves to have the attachment have a function or to have a purpose. Okay, so as an example, I looked up the definition of attachment, and one of the examples that came up was this. The food processor comes with a blender attachment. Okay, one of these use it in a sentence examples. So if you tried to blend something with the attachment alone, it wouldn't work, right? The attachment needs the host, which in this case is the food processor, to function at all. If that blender attachment loses the food processor as its host, it becomes entirely useless and has no purpose anymore. And we experience the same thing when we attach ourselves to things. If I root my entire identity in my job, my career, let's say, what happens when I lose that job? Well, I feel entirely useless and I lose my sense of purpose, just like the blender attachment. However, if I can root my identity in connection instead, I can feel grounded and comforted in the fact that even if I were to lose the thing that I'm connected to, I can exist securely without it. It offers me an interdependence instead of dependence, I guess you could think about it that way. Connection exists between two independently functional and self-sufficient entities that, by meaningfully connecting together, have the potential to become stronger, but they don't lose their individual purpose and function when they are not connected. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. So, I may enjoy my career, but I don't root my entire sense of self in it. If tomorrow I lost my job, I feel confident that I could do well at another one, just as I did well in this one. This is also how I think of successful personal relationships as well. I don't need my partner, but I know that we both have the potential to build stronger, better versions of ourselves and our lives alongside each other or connected to each other. We may lean on each other to fulfill natural needs that we have, love, support, and so on, but we don't need each other to feel whole, to feel like we have a purpose, to feel like we have a function, right? There is a Gestalt effect, which is where the sum is greater than its parts, that comes from this symbiotic relationship between two entities in connection, which is great. But again, independently still functional. Another way to think about whether you are in attachment or in connection to something or someone is to picture what would happen if that was lost. So a lost connection can result in a loss in auxiliary benefits, or that Gestalt effect, right? Where the sum is greater than its parts. That extra stuff might go away, but the primary purpose is not lost. Versus a lost attachment loses everything, and it instantly becomes purposeless and unstable. So the way I see it, attachment leads to dependence and anxiety. Connection leads to stability and strength. So in terms of what we can do with this information, I would encourage you, like I said, to think about that question, who would you be if you lost everything you have? But also, in addition to that, I would encourage you to try listing out all the things that you are attached to. Again, from a neutral place, okay? This is not good or bad that we're attached to things. It's just the way that it is. And I think that listing them out can be a great first step in building self-awareness around what we depend on in our daily lives. Then, to take it a step further, a good next step towards healthy detachment would be visualizing losing each of these things one by one and what that would mean for your sense of self. So go through the list, just pick one thing at a time. Don't lose it all at once, because that's just asking for a full identity crisis. But take one thing at a time and just sit with it for a little bit. Just really close your eyes. Picture yourself losing that thing. You're going to feel a lot of feelings. And that's fine. Let the feelings happen. Take note of the feelings. Try to observe the feelings in your physical response from a neutral place if possible. And just like, what do you call it? This may be wrong, but something like exposure therapy, right? If you can expose yourself to that feeling just a little bit at a time, once in a while, you'll notice that healthy detachment will naturally start to happen. The more anxiety you feel visualizing each of these things, the more attachment you likely have to it, and the more work you have to do in those areas. And that in itself is valuable information to have, right? Even just being aware of that, I think, is a great place to start. It might seem silly to purposely picture losing the things that we care about. Might actually say that I'm insane for suggesting it, but if you hear me out, I like to think of this as an exercise in emotional strength, right? Similar to how you'd go to the gym and expose yourself to the discomfort of heavy weights, just so that it is less challenging to lift that amount of weight should the need arise in everyday life. You become more able to deal with it with ease. If it ever kind of snuck up on you and somebody said, hey, can you pick up this 10-kilogram bag of potatoes at the grocery store, let's say, if you've never lifted 10 kilograms in your life, that's going to seem impossible. But if you repeatedly expose yourself to that on purpose at the gym, it becomes easy, right? When the time comes, and you never know when that time is going to come necessarily. And the same thing applies on an emotional level with what we can do here, right? Micro exposure to these losses or potential losses helps us become stronger and more capable to remain stable in the event of an actual loss. So by working through an exercise like this, we actually can take control of the process and root ourselves in strength for the future versions of ourselves, which may or may not lose something. But most likely some sort of loss will happen. And I do believe that there's transferable benefit. So if you become comfortable with losing one thing, you do build a sort of resiliency that will transfer to a loss of something else if that's what ends up happening to you instead. So with that, I'm going to close out today's episode. I think that's a great place to start. a great couple of exercises to go through. If you have any thoughts on attachment, detachment, or any experience doing this type of work, I would love to have a conversation with you. So please feel free to let me know. But as always, I do thank you all for your time and attention for listening today. If you enjoyed this topic, please feel free as always to like, comment, subscribe, share with a friend who you think might enjoy it too. So with that, thank you once again, and we will see you on our next episode of Mindset Over Matter. Thanks so much. Take care.